lying?
Yeah.
Why would you put him in the room and lock him in a bedroom, a tiny little bedroom with a roided up? Just stop and think about that. You're in a room smaller than this studio that you and I are in right now with a roided up.
Well, it is a Pandora's box in a way. Yeah, sure. Because basically, if you go, as my books show, if you go as deep as I went in writing those 2 books, and you could certainly go deeper, it basically shows that, the world is basically run by a meta cartel.
Jeffrey Epstein didn't hang himself in that cell. He was extracted, and the people who made it happen are still calling the shots. Everyone bought the self-harm story because the cameras failed, the guards fell asleep, and the autopsy photos vanished until Ghislaine Maxwell's latest court filing landed like a grenade, naming 29 men who cut secret deals to stay out of the files. And the Department of Justice is now scrambling to redact names faster than they can explain why the released documents include forged self-harm footage and a fake letter linking a former president to underage exploitation. The DOJ missed its December 19 due date to release over 2 million pages of evidence, publishing less than 1%, while Attorney General Pam Bondi claims near-term transparency. Yet her team just admitted to planting fabricated materials in the public record. Leon Black paid Epstein $170 million for tax advice, settled a $62.5 million lawsuit with no charges, and testified about partying with Donald Trump in Moscow clubs, while the DOJ's redaction army works overtime to scrub names from 200 gigabytes of seized tapes they refuse to acknowledge exist. The problem isn't what's in the files, it's that the files are still being edited, and the men who settled aren't acting like men who believe the threat is over. The real question isn't whether Epstein is gone, but who's still paying to keep the operation running, and what happens when the next batch of names drops before the due date they've already
We've seen
ignored.
Dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically 2 for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President.
The Department of Justice's latest letter to the federal judges overseeing Jeffrey Epstein's case arrived on a Tuesday, signed by Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and Manhattan's top prosecutor Jay Clayton. It promised transparency in the near term, a phrase so deliberately vague it might as well have been written in invisible ink. The problem isn't just that they missed the December 19th due date to release over 2 million pages of documents. It's that they've only made public 12,285 files, a fraction of 1% of the total, while quietly admitting some of those contained fabricated materials. This isn't a delay, it's a controlled demolition of the truth. And the timing is suspicious. Just days earlier, Ghislaine Maxwell's legal team dropped a habeas petition naming 29 men who allegedly cut secret settlements with Epstein's victims, men who were never indicted, whose names remain redacted, and who, according to people tracking the case, are still very much in play. Here's where the story starts to bend. The DOJ claims they're protecting victims by redacting names, yet the files they've released include a forged self-harm video and a fake letter purporting to show Epstein corresponding with convicted abuser Larry Nassar. Documents so poorly constructed that even the DOJ's own social media accounts had to issue a warning. This fake letter serves as a reminder that just because a document is released by the Department of Justice does not make the allegations or claims within the document factual. That's not a disclaimer. That's an admission. They're not just withholding evidence, they're actively poisoning the well. And the question no one in the mainstream press is asking is simple. If the files are so sensitive that they require this level of manipulation, what's really in the other 99.9% that they're still hiding?
Moments ago, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have released photos
from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. We're getting dribs and drabs of this, and we had some pictures already, and here's some. There are some that show Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Steve Bannon, Bill Gates, and others. None of the released images depicts any misconduct. None is believed to depict underage girls. It was not immediately clear when or where they were.
The answer might lie in the behavior of the men connected to Jeffrey Epstein who aren't acting like men who believe the threat is over. Take Leon Black, the former CEO of Apollo Global Management, who paid Epstein $170 million for what was officially described as tax and estate planning. That's a strange kind of financial advice when the advisor in question is a registered offender with a history of exploitative behavior. Black later settled a separate lawsuit with the U.S. Virgin Islands for $62.5 million. Again, no criminal charges, just a quiet financial transaction to make a problem disappear. But here's the part that doesn't add up. In 2018, Black testified under oath about a trip he took with Donald Trump to Russia in the 1990s, where, according to his own sworn statement, they attended a concert, a discotheque, and might have been in a club together. That's not a memory lapse. That's a man carefully choosing his words because he knows the wrong ones could unravel something bigger. And now, with Ghislaine Maxwell's filing naming Black among the 29, the question isn't just what he paid for. It's what he's still protecting.
Gets to decide. The Bureau of Prisons is run independently from the FBI, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the judiciary, and who knows where the person's going to go. That's just how it happens. Right. So for Ghislaine Maxwell to have been transferred to actually a prison that has very, very minimal security and is just not fit for someone who's been convicted of horrible crimes against.
The DOJ's handling of the files suggests they're not just redacting names, they're managing an ongoing operation. Consider the 200 gigabytes of seized videos and audio recordings mentioned in a July 2025 FBI memo that have yet to see the light of day. The official explanation is that these contain sensitive material involving victims, but people familiar with the investigation describe them differently, not as evidence of crimes, but as a ledger, a record of who was where, with whom, and under what circumstances. That's not the kind of thing you bury to protect the innocent. That's the kind of thing you suppress to protect the powerful. And the DOJ's own poll numbers confirm the public isn't buying their story. 66% of Americans believe the government is intentionally holding back information. That's not skepticism, that's a verdict. Then there's the matter of the 29 men Ghislaine Maxwell named in her filing. The DOJ's response? More redactions, more delays, more promises of transparency that never arrive. But the silence from the named individuals is even more telling. No denials, no lawsuits, no public outrage. Just a quiet, coordinated effort to keep the names out of the press. That's not the behavior of men who believe the story is over. That's the behavior of men who know the next chapter hasn't been written yet. And if the DOJ is still redacting their names while releasing forged documents, the logical conclusion is that they're not just hiding the past, they're shaping the future. The most damning detail might be what's happening in the background. While the public focuses on the DOJ's stalling tactics, insiders note that Ghislaine Maxwell's prison conditions have quietly improved. She's no longer in a high-security facility, but in what's been described as a Club Med prison, with rumors of a work-release program in the works. That's not a reward for good behavior, that's a negotiation. And if Maxwell is the only one talking, the question isn't just what she knows, it's what she's being offered to keep quiet. Meanwhile, the DOJ's next due date looms, and the betting among those watching the case closely isn't on whether they'll meet it, but on what they'll release to distract from what they're still hiding.
There was new names in some of the emails that I think investigators need to look at. In particular, I jumped on the name of a modeling agent who, in a similar fashion to Jean-Luc Brunel, who brought underage girls from overseas to Jeffrey Epstein for abuse. There was another man. What was interesting about this other individual is that he also apparently provided young models for Donald Trump's modeling agency.
The DOJ's handling of the files suggests they're not just redacting names, they're managing an ongoing operation. Consider the 200 gigabytes of seized videos and audio recordings mentioned in a July 2025 FBI memo that have yet to see the light of day. The official explanation is that these contain sensitive material involving victims, but people familiar with the investigation describe them differently, not as evidence of crimes, but as a ledger, a record of who was where, with whom, and under what circumstances. That's not the kind of thing you bury to protect the innocent. That's the kind of thing you suppress to protect the powerful. And the DOJ's own poll numbers confirm the public isn't buying their story. 66% of Americans believe the government is intentionally holding back information. That's not skepticism, that's a verdict. Then there's the matter of the 29 men Ghislaine Maxwell named in her filing. The DOJ's response: more redactions, more delays, more promises of transparency that never arrive. But the silence from the named individuals is even more telling. No denials, no lawsuits, no public outrage, just a quiet, coordinated effort to keep the names out of the press. That's not the behavior of men who believe the story is over. That's the behavior of men who know the next chapter hasn't been written yet. And if the DOJ is still redacting their names while releasing forged documents, the logical conclusion is that they're not just hiding the past, they're shaping the future. The most damning detail might be what's happening in the background. While the public focuses on the DOJ's stalling tactics, insiders note that Ghislaine Maxwell's prison conditions have quietly improved. She's no longer in a high-security facility, but in what's been described as a Club Med prison, with rumors of a work-release program in the works. That's not a reward for good behavior, that's a negotiation. And if Maxwell is the only one talking, the question isn't just what she knows, it's what she's being offered to keep quiet. Meanwhile, the DOJ's next due date looms, and the betting among those watching the case closely isn't on whether they'll meet it, but on what they'll release to distract from what they're still
So basically
hiding.
what I argue in my book is that the network behind Epstein, and the reason why there's so many powerful people in this group, is because it's born out of this union that occurred during World War II between organized crime and the nascent U.S. intelligence apparatus, which, of course, there was a lot of British involvement with that when in the creation of, the CIA and the OS.
Consider the patterns. Leon Black didn't just pay Jeffrey Epstein $170 million for financial advice. He settled a separate $62.5 million lawsuit with the U.S. Virgin Islands without ever facing criminal charges. That's not a one-time payout. That's a subscription fee. And Black isn't the only one. The 29 men named in Ghislaine Maxwell's habeas petition didn't cut secret deals because they were afraid of lawsuits. They did it because they were investing in continued access to a system that offered protection. This wasn't about avoiding consequences. It was about maintaining privileges. And the fact that none of these men have been indicted despite Maxwell's filing suggests the deals they made weren't just with Epstein. They were with the people who took over his operation after he was gone.
Things like Epstein, and there's probably a bunch of other similar operations that are being run, they provide you with like a really good time, or maybe you're a high profile, extremely wealthy individual, and it's hard for you to get hosed. And some guy tells you, hey, we've got everything covered. You come to my island, nothing, what happens on the island stays on the island.
Rodate.
The Clinton connection adds another layer to this. Jeffrey Epstein didn't just visit the White House 17 times during the 1990s. He was meeting with Mark Middleton, a senior aide who later became a key figure in the Clinton Foundation's global initiatives. That's not a coincidence. It's a pipeline. And the foundation's ties to the Maxwell family, particularly Isabel Maxwell, whose nonprofit work overlapped with the Clinton Global Initiative, suggest this wasn't just about personal relationships. It was about institutional access. The same network that allegedly facilitated Epstein's activities in the private sector seems to have had open doors in the political world. And the fact that none of this has been seriously investigated suggests the protection isn't just for individuals, it's for the system itself. Then there's the modeling industry angle, which has been strangely absent from mainstream coverage. John Casablancas, the founder of Elite Model Management, didn't just run a talent agency. He built a global operation that, according to multiple accounts, functioned as a supply chain for powerful men with specific tastes. His protégés didn't just work in fashion, they ended up in politics, finance, and even the Trump administration. And the fact that Casablancas himself was open about his preferences, once telling an interviewer, "I like very young girls," wasn't a scandal, it was a signal. This wasn't a secret. It was a system with its own rules, its own language, and its own protection mechanisms. And Epstein wasn't an outlier in that world. He was a node in a much larger network. The arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi's name appearing in the same circles as Epstein and Casablancas isn't just a footnote, it's a clue. Khashoggi wasn't just a client of Epstein's, he was a figure in the Iran-Contra affair, a man with deep ties to intelligence agencies and a reputation for operating in the gray zones between legality and criminality. His presence in this network suggests Epstein's operation wasn't just about personal indulgence, it was about leverage. And if Khashoggi was involved, it's reasonable to assume the operation had connections to the same kinds of people who used his services. Politicians who needed plausible deniability, businessmen who wanted access to power, and intelligence operatives who saw an opportunity to collect compromising material. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's a business model. The Department of Justice's insistence on redacting names and withholding evidence starts to make sense in this context. They're not just protecting individuals, they're protecting the relationships between them. The 200 gigabytes of seized videos and audio recordings aren't just evidence of crimes, they're a map of who was connected to whom, under what circumstances, and with what implications. And the fact that the DOJ is still fighting to keep that material hidden suggests it's not just about the past, it's about who still has access to that information and what they're using it for. The forged documents, the stalled releases, the careful redactions, none of it looks like incompetence. It looks like damage control for a system that's still operational.
The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy redactions.
Ghislaine Maxwell's improved prison conditions and the rumors of a potential work release program aren't signs that the system is weakening. They're signs that she's still part of it. She's not being rewarded for good behavior, she's being managed. And if she's the only one talking, the question isn't just what she knows, it's what she's being offered to stay quiet. The fact that she's naming names now after years of silence suggests she's either been given permission to do so or she's trying to force the hand of the people who are still protecting the network. Either way, it's not a coincidence that the DOJ's redaction efforts have intensified since her filing. They're not just hiding the past, they're negotiating the present. The real distraction isn't the files themselves, it's the endless cycle of leaks that never actually reveal anything. Every few weeks, another batch of documents drops, each one hyped as the final bombshell that will expose the truth. The media pounces, the public debates, and then nothing changes. The names are redacted, the key details are missing, and the conversation shifts to the next leak, which is just as hollow as the last. This isn't an accident, it's a strategy. The people who control the narrative know that as long as the public is chasing shadows, they won't notice the real operations still running in the background. The latest round of leaks is a perfect example. A few heavily redacted emails, some blurred names, and a handful of unverified tips that lead nowhere. The headlines scream new revelations, but the actual content is always the same. Just enough to keep the story alive, but never enough to answer the real questions. Meanwhile, the people who were actually involved in Jeffrey Epstein's network, those 29 men, the politicians, the intelligence-connected figures, stay silent. They don't need to defend themselves because the leaks are doing the work for them, drowning out the real issues with noise. And then there's the timing. Every time pressure builds, when Congress threatens subpoenas, when Maxwell's filings drop, when the public starts asking the right questions, a new leak appears. It's never the full truth. It's never the names everyone's waiting for. It's just enough to reset the clock, to keep the public distracted while the real players regroup. The files aren't being released, they're being weaponized. And the longer this goes on, the clearer it becomes. The leaks aren't the story. The leaks
but we
are
have
the
a congressional
cover.
act now to requiring the release, but they're going to say, you know
subject
what?
to
Tom
redaction.
Hanks, it's unfair that he was mentioned
the
because he
law
was eating
says
Skittles.
subject to redaction. Subject to redaction.
And we all know what that means. That's to protect.
That's why I'm saying you will never be satisfied with what's released.
The most disturbing implication of all this is that Jeffrey Epstein's operation wasn't an aberration. It was a feature of the system. The same people who used his services are still in power. The same networks that protected him are still functioning. And the Department of Justice's behavior suggests they're not just covering up what happened, they're making sure the system that allowed it to happen can continue to operate. The files aren't just a record of past crimes. They're a ledger of ongoing relationships. And the fact that the DOJ is still fighting to control that information suggests the real scandal isn't what Epstein did. It's who's still benefiting from the system he built. The next due date for the DOJ to release more files is approaching, but no one who's been watching this case closely expects them to meet it. The real question is what they'll release to distract from what they're still hiding. Will it be more forged documents, more carefully redacted names, or will they finally let something slip that reveals the true scope of the operation? One thing is certain. The people connected to Epstein aren't waiting to find out. They're already moving to protect themselves. And if the past is any indication, they'll succeed. So here's where we leave it, with more questions than answers, because that's the point. How does Leon Black pay $170 million to someone like Epstein and walk away without charges? Why are the same names that appeared in Epstein's circle still untouchable? What's really on those 200 gigabytes of tapes the DOJ won't release? And if Epstein's operation was just one part of a larger system, who's running that system now? The comments are open. Tell us what you think. Because one thing this story has proven is that the official version isn't just incomplete, it's a lie by design. And the truth, as always, is still being negotiated in the shadows. We'll be watching.